Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're out the range to talk about the SIG 550 series of rifles. And that's because in a previous video we did where we're talking about the AK and who did it better, we talked about the Valmet, the Galil, and the original Russian rifle. I made a comment in the video saying that I don't consider the 550 series to be an AK. And many of you commented down below saying, well, we do. So let me explain to you in this video why I don't consider this to be an AK. I do admit that it's heavily influenced by the AK, but there are a number of different firearms in the firearms world that were influenced by previous designs, but that does not make them a copy of or a derivative of. And so that's what we're going to get into in today's video, and I hope you enjoy it. So let's start off shooting this little SIG. I love these rifles. They're absolutely amazing. A lot of folks ask me, how can I get involved in the firearms business in that particular community? And one of the best ways to do that is to become a gunsmith. Every gunsmith I know is just overbooked with work. It's a very good living. And so if you would like to become a gunsmith, you need to go to a gunsmithing school or become an apprentice for an existing gunsmith. But Modern Gun School is an accredited college that also works with veterans in the GI Bill, where you can go and get a degree from accredited college in gunsmithing and then go out and start your own gunsmithing business, which I think is a really great option. Again, throughout my entire life, gunsmiths have always been able to earn a really good living, assuming they have a really strong work ethic. So please check out Modern Gun School. I do have a link in the video description below. So before we take a closer look at the SIG, let's take a look at the original AK-47, and that's what I'm holding here. This is the US M1 Garand. This is a naval version, the Chambers 308. But yeah, why am I calling it an AK? Well, if we're going to call the SIG an AK, we have to call this an AK as well, even though it predates the AK. And that's because the AK, according to Kalashnikov, it was heavily influenced by this rifle. Its two-lug rotating bolt and its trigger group and other aspects of this rifle were heavy inspirations for him when they were developing the AK. And so that goes to the line that I'm trying to talk to you about in this particular video. It's just because something is inspired by something else doesn't make it the same thing. So I don't really consider this to be an AK or a variant of the AK, or the AK a variant of the M1 Garand, or Garand as it may be. But that's just kind of how this kind of plays out. Everybody says that looks like that had sex with that, and that came from that because of this, and it's all just one big thing. It's kind of like the Masadas. Everything looks like a Masada, but they're not copies of the Masada. They all have their own operating systems, and usually parts don't interchange. And that's certainly the case with the M1 Garand and the AK. No parts interchangeability. All right, so some of you guys are going to disagree with me, and that's perfectly fine. We can agree to disagree on this point, but let me explain to you why this is not an AK in my view. So there are some similarities, and let's go over some of those between this rifle and an AK. Now, the 550 series, this is a 551 version, obviously was inspired by the AK, as I've already said. But let's start off with some of those similarities. So what's interesting about the rifle is that it does not have a buffer tube or recoil spring that protrudes out the rear of the receiver like an AR-15, so it has that in common with the Russian rifle. Moving forward, we have stamped sheet metal construction. Well, that's very similar to an AK, right? They use stamped sheet metal, so let's go ahead and say that's a similarity. The charging handle is fixed and protrudes out the right side of the receiver and reciprocates when the gun fires. So that's very much like an AK, but it's also like the M1 Garand, which predates both rifles. And as I talked about in the opening of the video, the M1 Garand was the inspiration for the two-lug rotating bolt that Kalashnikov would use in his rifle, and the trigger group was similar, and then you have similarities in the gas system and stuff like that as well, which we'll get into. I'll take the M1 Garand apart. All right, so you have that charging handle over here that's very similar. It uses AK-style rock and lock magazines, right? You have the release right here, and so that's very similar to the AK. From there, it's nothing but differences, right? So the differences, in my view, are far more than the similarities. And I should also mention that there are no parts commonality between the SIG 550 series of rifles and any AK that I'm aware of. So you have that as well. That makes it a distinctly different rifle from any AK I've ever seen. So now let's go into what some of the differences are between this rifle and why I do not consider it a version of the AK. Something that's very big to me, a major difference between the two, is that despite the fact they use sheet metal construction, This rifle, clamshells open, has two pins like an AR-15. I can take the one out in the front, separate the upper and lower from each other, but it clamshells open just like an AR-15. That is completely different from the AK. The AK uses a top cover and a single receiver piece down here, and that top cover is very flimsy. The weapon can be fired without it. Generally speaking, they put the sights forward on the Russian AKs because putting the sights back here on the top cover was difficult to maintain accuracy, although Valmet and Galil did it, and now with the AK-12, you'll see rear sights back here. But earlier versions of the AK, this would not be possible, right? So this type of construction is completely different from the AK. Another thing that really is quite different from the AK is the AK uses a big selector lever over here on the right-hand side, and the SIG uses a more traditional selector lever that we in the West would be used to using. Major difference there. AKs generally don't lock open on the last shot fired. You can use Yugo magazines where the bolt rams into the follower of the magazine, but as soon as you take the magazine out, the bolt goes home. This rifle was designed to be, reloaded with the bolt locking to the rear, insert the magazine, hit the bolt release over here the AK doesn't have, and it will chamber that round. So completely different. This has an optics mounting system on the top. AKs would have them on the side in later versions. This has an optics mounting system that sits right here on the top, completely different. Something else that is a major departure from the AK design is the AK has a recoil spring and guide rod that sits behind the bolt and carrier. This is under spring pressure, and you see the bolt moving, but there's nothing behind it, right? So there's no guide rod, no recoil spring behind the bolt and carrier. That's because this is a completely different design, and the long stroke gas piston's up here, but the recoil spring rides around the gas piston. So it's been moved to in front of the bolt carrier, and it rides around the gas piston. Completely different design. All right, and then coming out here, we have the gas block, which is adjustable, which is different. And one more thing inside of the receiver. The trigger mechanism. It may look AK-ish with the coiled springs on either side of the hammer, but the AK will use one or two hooks that will grab the hammer from the side. This does not have that. This has a sear surface back here. So it's similar, but also quite dissimilar. And again, none of the parts in this rifle are compatible with an AK in any way that I've ever found. No version of the AK. So again, those differences outnumber the similarities, and that's why I would say, while inspired by the AK, this is not an AK. Now let's take this rifle apart, take the AK apart, and what the heck, we'll take the M1 Garand apart too, and let's take a look at the internal components because you're going to see similarities and complete differences as well. So here we have the Chinese AK field stripped, and here's the bolt carrier, very familiar to you guys. Here's the bolt, very distinctive. The bolt just sits in like this, and it rotates to lock and unlock. Very simple design. All right, with that being said, this is the bolt of the M1 Garand, and it too rotates and turns and locks. And so Kalashnikov said this was the inspiration for his rotating bolt. The AK has a long stroke gas piston, so this will go into the gas block up front towards the end of the barrel, and that pushes directly on that piston. You take a look at the M1 Garand. This is its op rod. The bolt will sit here. Now, like the SIG, the gas piston, but the recoil spring is set forward of the bolt and carrier, or just the bolt in this case. And this, my friends, is a long stroke gas piston. This goes all the way up to the end of the rifle, and it goes into a gas block, and then gas comes out, impinges on this, pushes it rearward, and cycles the action. And so this long stroke gas piston likely had some influence over the AK's long stroke gas piston. And then finally, the trigger of the Garand. Kalashnikov said that this was partially inspired his design as well. It has an inverted hook, so the hook rides between the hammer and the slot, and it kind of grabs it from both sides. Different in my opinion, but he cited this as being at least partially an inspiration for his design. So, is the M1 Garand an AK, or is the AK an M1 Garand? I would think most of us would agree it's not, but one clearly influenced the other. So let's take a look at the SIG. Here's the bolt carrier of the SIG, here's the bolt carrier of the AK. Clearly completely different. Now you're going to notice it has the tail back here and things like that, so there are those similarities. Probably where the biggest similarity comes in is in the bolt, and this is why I think people consider it to be an AK. So as I showed you how the AK bolt works, this is how the SIG bolt works. Now, the cam surface is back here. It's not up on the bolt head like on the AK, but still, it's clearly inspired. by the AK. And if you look at the face of the bolts, obviously there's lineage there. So I think this is why people consider it to be an AK. And I understand that. I just say it's heavily influenced. Now, where the big differences are, this is your gas piston. And as I said, the recoil spring rides around it, where on the AK, the recoil spring sits behind the bolt and carrier. With the SIG, the bolt and carrier set behind the recoil spring. Now, the charging handle goes in like this and holds the two together, so they're segmented, unlike the AK. So you pull the charging handle out, and that releases it, so you can field strip the gun. And then here's your gas port and things like that. And this is how you field strip the gas system on the SIG. You rotate this, and it just comes out, and then you can pull the piston and everything out. Obviously, the gas tube is completely different on the AK. All right, guys, if you disagree with me and you think this is an AK variant, that is your right to do that. Me, I'm going to stick with, it's not an AK, just heavily inspired by it. But I do look forward to your comments down below. What do you think of the SIG 550 series of rifles? Do you think they're AK variants? Do you think they're their own rifles? More importantly, do you like them? Because I love them. All right, guys, if you have any questions about anything you've seen in this video, you can comment down below. Obviously, we do read those comments. Many times you inspire videos like this one, so feel free to comment down below and let me know what you think. Also, if you'd like to support us here at the Military Arms channel, please swing by, check out our Patreon page. There's a link in the video description below. Right here on YouTube, you got the support button underneath the video player you're watching right now. You can mash that button and support us right here on YouTube in the age of demonetization. Thank you for 18 years of support. Swing by, check out Copper Custom. We'll talk to you guys soon.